Chinese Heritage Tour of the American West, sponsored by the Wing-Luke Asian Museum in Seattle and the United States Forest Service. Dale Hom, a forest manager for the Sawtooth National Forest in Idaho, helped arrange the tour so that members of the local community could participate in the rediscovery of frontier settlements once inhabited by hundreds and thousands of pioneers from southern China, sites made barren by the passage of time. In these places, the Chinese mined for gold, planted crops, laid railroad track, and established frontier businesses. Until the late 1800s and early 1900s, when racist mobs and discriminatory laws forced their disappearance, the Chinese contributed their sweat and ingenuity to the development of many Western towns and settlements. When the Chinese vanished, their stories remain untold, waiting for the return of a future generation curious to unearth the past. The tour group first gathered at the Wing-Luke Asian Museum in the heart of Seattle's Chinatown International District to board a bus that would take them south to Oregon and then east to Idaho. They would visit Pendleton, Baker City, Sumter, Granite, John Day, Boise, and Idaho City, each place rich in a trail of artifacts left by the Chinese. The tour group included individuals with a unique blend of talents. There were specialists, historians, anthropologists, and archaeologists, and there were non-specialists, Chinese Americans who added rich first-hand detail to the interpretation of the Chinese American experience. One of the senior members of the tour group was Clifton Goon, the grandson of Goon Dip, an influential merchant who immigrated to America in the 1870s. Goon Dip recruited thousands of Chinese to work in salmon canneries throughout the Northwest.
No.
Another senior tour group member was Bing Lum, who worked in one of Goon Dip's canneries in Bellingham as a young boy. The group also included younger Chinese Americans like Serena Wu, who came on this trip with her mother in search of her own history. Her grandfather, Wu Jian, was a business partner with Chin Hock, the first Chinese to settle in Seattle in 1860. The first stop of the Heritage Tour was in Pendleton, Oregon. The city featured an underground tour, a popular tourist attraction.
But once they got in there, then they had to be in there for 3 hours. Sounds like an awful long time, doesn't it?
During the underground tour, visitors were led through a maze of corridors and rooms below the city streets. The recreations were a classic example of how the contributions of early Chinese settlers have been misinterpreted and stereotyped. Artifacts were often mislabeled, and the exhibits inaccurately suggested that the Chinese were a secretive, mysterious people who wanted nothing to do with the larger society. As an interpretive site, the Pendleton Underground Tour lacked cultural understanding and historic accuracy. It was with a sense of relief that the tour group arrived in John Day, Oregon, the site of the Kamwa Chung & Company, a famous general store and herbal shop operated by two Chinese men in the late 1800s and early 1900s. The building has been carefully preserved as a museum. The The tour group members immediately recognized the authenticity of the site and the sensitivity with which the story of this frontier outpost was presented. The store was started in 1887 by two partners, Long Ong, a businessman, and Ing He, a Chinese herb doctor. The store sold mining and food supplies, including canned goods, notions, tobacco, and tea. Hearing stories of his cures, people traveled up to 100 miles to be treated by Ing He, known as Doc He. He was a master of pulse diagnosis, a traditional Chinese method of detecting illness through light pressure on the wrist. It was said that Doc He had one of the most extensive collections of herbs outside of China.
As I told you, Doc He would take your pulse, find out what your problem was, and then he would come back here and fix your herbs and medicines. He had 500 different Chinese herbs on the shelves. We know what 220 of them are used for. For Doc He to know what all 500 were for.
When Lung died in 1940, Helen K's grandfather, Bob Wah, helped Doc He run the Kamwa Chung and Company until it closed in the 1950s. Doc He by this time was almost blind and spoke little English.
Well, actually, Doc He was the one who asked for someone to come and help him here and care for him because his partner was gone and there were no other Chinese around, and I don't think that he had anybody else that he felt could help him. And so he asked my grandfather to come and join him in the herb business, and that's how he came to settle here. Well, the exterior more or less is exactly the same, and the interior, as far as I can remember, is pretty much the same too. When I remember was that it was dark, and I remember the places where he always burnt incense, and they're still here, the same places. It was pretty much like this, pretty bare.
As Chinese moved from the earlier settlements into the big cities, buildings like the Kamwa Chung and Company were abandoned. However, these structures, when properly preserved, continue to have an important purpose, educating future generations about the struggles and achievements of the Chinese American pioneers.